Good evening and welcome to the Classical Now. I'm Will Fraser and tonight I'm joined by the pianist Derek Yaple-Schobert. Derek, good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, one thing which maybe the audience can't see, but I can see, is that your shoes do not have heels on them. Is there a reason for that?
There is actually. I'm quite tall and I'm quite long from my knee down to my heel, and very often the pianos, my legs, if I wore heels, they don't quite go under the piano.
Right. How tall are you?
So, 6'3".
Okay.
And but that way, I had these specially designed actually, the heels removed and just a sole put on. So now my legs do fit underneath the keyboard.
One of the pieces you're playing tonight is a toccata in E minor by Bach. That's a piece which was written originally for the harpsichord, but you're playing it on the piano.
Right.
Could you tell us how you go about performing a piece on an instrument which the piece actually wasn't written for?
The big difference with the piano versus the harpsichord is on the piano you have an incredible dynamic range, and you know, it's very touch sensitive, so to speak. Whereas on the harpsichord you tend to have, if you press it softly or loudly, you get the same volume of sound. But there is, kind of by pulling out the keyboard on a harpsichord, or there's sometimes two levels of keyboards, you get sort of two different colors. So very often one tries to do sort of block dynamics, where one section is loud and then the next section soft and then the next section loud again.
Now, is this piece written in sections, in blocks?
Well, the toccata is in 4 parts, and the 4th part is one can do that sort of block dynamics. However, the first 3 sections are more improvised, because in Bach's day, musicians improvised a lot more. So it has to have that improvisatory feel to it. And in the opening, it's sort of an improvised introduction that's slowly coming to life, so to speak. And in the 3rd section is a bit like the Baroque opera or oratorio, where you have the aria, and then you have the singer giving a recitative with simply actually a harpsichord, in this case, accompanying the singer.
Okay, now what is a recitative?
A recitative is where a sort of a declamatory statement. In other words, you have the aria, which is sung, and then the recitative, which is sort of sung, sort of spoken at the same time.
So it doesn't have quite as much of a tune, for instance, as the aria bit? It's
no, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if these 2 sections are improvisatory, the 2nd and 4th sections are not improvisatory, are they?
No, they're fugues. The 2nd section is actually a double fugue, where you have 2 subjects happening at the very same time. And the final 4th part is a fugue, a 3-part fugue. So you have the one hand starting the subject, and before it's finished, then the other hand comes in with the same subject, but a bit higher up.
Okay, and then the 3rd part, you're obviously not the 3rd hand, but the 3rd part comes in with the same thing.
Yeah, you have 2 hands, but you got to get another melody in there too.
And what about in the double fugue? You've got 2 hands and there are 2 subjects.
Yeah.
How many parts are there?
Well, it's kind of like there's a fugue, double fugue. There's like 1 fugue in 2-part and then another fugue in 2-part. But the subject is happening at the same time, so very often you have to play some of the subject with both hands, some of the melody with both hands. But it has to sound like it's one hand playing that melody.
So it's very complicated music, in other words?
A little bit, yeah.
Does it sound as if it's complicated?
No, I don't think so.
So it just sort of rolls along as if it's just...
I think so, but you have to be able to hear. The interesting thing is with Bach, it's very, there's this polyphony, and you have to hear all these voices happening at the same time. So that's always a challenge, not only to play them, but to sort of hear them, because if I hear them, then I know the audience is going to be able to follow them.
Derek, did you come to the piano early in life?
I did start music lessons and piano lessons around the age of 6 or 7, but from age 6 to 7, 6 to about 15, it was, you know, your 1-, 2-page conservatory pieces, and you'd have your 10-minute exam at the end of the year, and you were sort of glad that summer vacation would start. But then my first piano teacher got married and moved away, so I had to find another piano teacher, and I feel it's this other piano teacher who sort of introduced me to what so-called classical music was all about, and the incredible wealth of repertoire that I feel just covers the entire range of human emotions. And I think, you know, classical music has to be revitalized in a certain way. And judging on my own personal experience of having been introduced to this repertoire, and I'll give you an example, Beethoven, he wrote 32 piano sonatas, and each sonata there's between 3 and 4 movements, and that's lasting between 10 minutes and 30 minutes, probably worth about 10 CDs. And the general public may be aware of the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata or the second movement of the Pathétique, which are very beautiful, of course, but to me that's sort of you know, one element or one part of, quote, classical music. Yet there's some of the other of his sonatas where it's incredibly passionate and you know, or very spiritual or very reflective and just like, wow. Or other works, for example, by Prokofiev. I mean, the general public would probably be familiar with Peter and the Wolf, but he's written 9 piano sonatas, and there are 3 that are written during the Second World War, known as the War Sonatas. And there's an incredible drive in those works, and I mean, who needs heavy metal when listening to that? It's just so, you know, you're on the edge of your seat listening to this music. But I think it takes a while to get into the music, and also to get it, access it, for example. And when you think of pop music, I mean, it's sort of always there. You know, you're in a restaurant, it's blaring, it's sort of in your face. Whereas, quote classical, I put that in quotation as a genre, as it's known. You sort of have to almost go to it, in a sense, a little more. But I think your reward is much greater.
Now, there's one school which you have a particular specialty in, if you like. What's that?
Well, I've taken an interest in Scandinavian music, Scandinavian repertoire.
Why? What about Scandinavian music attracted you?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but my stepfather is Danish, and he's been in my life since I was very young, so perhaps not by blood, but he's my father in my heart kind of thing. So, and through him I've taken interest in Scandinavian or Danish culture, and I've actually learned the language. And
have you been there?
Yeah, I've been to Denmark, and I've actually taken lessons on Danish piano music with a real Dane.
So you studied that? You weren't just traveling there?
Yeah, I lived there in '96 for 1 semester. And then I've been back for 1-2 months at a time.
You're playing a piece by the Scandinavian composer Edvard Grieg. Could you tell us about that piece, please?
Yes, well, Edvard Grieg is probably Norway's most well-known composer. He's from the 19th century. And the piece I've chosen is his sonata, Opus 7 in E minor. And Edvard Grieg, he's written a lot of short pieces known as the lyric pieces, and but he hasn't written so many large-scale piano works. However, his piano concerto is probably his most famous
And that is
works.
large scale, isn't it?
That is very large scale, and of course you need an orchestra for that. But his sonata is one of his large-scale piano works, and he wrote it when he was only 22. So it has that youthful fervor and passion. And Edvard Grieg studied in Leipzig in Germany, which was a very large center for German Romanticism, so which inspired him very much, and that's kind of the style it's written in. However, he's able to incorporate Norwegian culture or Norwegian folk music in his music, which makes it very unique. And so you hear, he's kept the form of the sonata quite traditional, but he's able to incorporate a lot of elements, and you hear a lot of, you know, happy and sad and sort of evil and yet angelic, and you can almost hear the fjords and the mountains of Norway in it, and also certain folk caricatures like the trolls, you know, these little evil gremlins in there, and yeah, I think it's a wonderful work.
the audience may see our 2 cups there. They may think we have some water, just in case, you know, the throat gets a bit parched. But actually, in good Scandinavian form, we have some
Aquavit.
Aquavit,
yes,
exactly, a little drop of vodka. So perhaps we should raise a glass to, or a cup, to Scandinavian music.
Yes, skål.
Skål. Derek, it's been lovely having you on the show. Thank you very much. Gosh, it's quite strong, isn't it? Thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure and honor. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I'm Will Fraser, and remember, the future of classical music is now. Good night. Very good song. Another one.